Hi, you guys. On this week's episode of the SP Mamas podcast, I get to talk to Nicole Goss. She is a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, a women's health physical therapy assistant, and she's navigating her own experience with pelvic organ prolapse. She has a 2-year-old and is expecting, and is just a wealth of information. I hope you enjoy. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to the SP Mamas podcast. My name is Carolina. I'm the street parking pregnancy and postpartum coach. And today, my guest is Nicole Goss. Nicole, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Carolina, for having me. Super excited.
Yeah. So Nicole is a street parking member. Nicole, how long have you been a member?
Since just this last, let's see, so I'm going into 2 years. So I believe back in the beginning of 2020, so not terribly long.
Okay. Street parking member and also pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. And I'm really excited to go into that in a little bit further detail with you, Nicole, because that's a program by Brianna Battles that I have also completed, and we do a lot of the work for street parking for the SP Mamas is based on some of the training from the Brianna Battles program. So I'm excited to talk more about that soon. But Nicole, you are also a mom of a soon-to-be 2-year-old. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
On Monday.
Yay. And a 2-year-old little boy and expecting
little girl.
I didn't want to blow that for you. I just realized that. Okay. Okay.
Yep. Not a secret. So yeah, little girl, 17 weeks pregnant today.
Yay. Awesome. And you also are a women's health physical therapy assistant?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. So let's start with, I would say, I'm not sure which one came first, if it was your experience with coaching or with physical therapy. Which one of those came first for you?
As far as pregnancy, postpartum interest, or as far as when I just started?
I guess maybe both, either one of them.
So I graduated high school in 2006 and went straight into the physical therapy assistant program. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. And so did that program, and my husband's active duty military. And so we moved to Italy. That was our first duty station. And I couldn't do physical therapy anymore there because of the SOFA agreement we have with that country. And so I thought the next best thing that was relatively closely related, I've always been to health and fitness, is personal training. So I got my personal trainer cert in 2012. And so I've been doing both about part-time each since 2008, 2012, in between the two.
Okay. And then the pregnancy and postpartum athleticism, how did you find that program in particular? And what was it that led you to take on that certification?
So my husband and I, we had planned after his last deployment, which was ended in 2017. We had planned prior to that, when he'd come back from his deployment, we would start trying to have kids. And so I had come across Brianna on, I think at that time, I didn't even have an Instagram. It would have been Facebook. And just was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is really solid information. Because even at that time, I had a little bit of women's health, physical therapy. I'd primarily done sports med until that point. And so I had a little bit of knowledge there. And I'm like, wow, this is like key stuff that I can teach people in the clinic. And then 95% of my client base is women. And I also wanted to know for myself, okay, how do I, planning to get pregnant, how am I going to approach fitness? And so then I bit the bullet and I'm like, I got to do this course.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go into your first pregnancy and the story of that birth and
Yeah.
where that's led you.
Okay, so first pregnancy, I had gone into it with a great deal of knowledge from Brianna's course, and then several different pelvic floor courses for physical therapy. And so I had a lot of knowledge, and I felt really confident in how I should be approaching fitness with that pregnancy. And I felt really, really good. I was very blessed with a very easy pregnancy. I really didn't have any issues. I wasn't nauseous or anything like that. And was able to continue to work out all the way up until, about a week before I delivered. But I will say, and hindsight is 2020, looking back at, how I approached fitness, there were times that and I don't know if the viewers who are watching are familiar with Brianna Battles, but her term athlete brain. So it's just like this inner voice that you have that is just like, go do more, try to push yourself. And outside of pregnancy and postpartum, that can be really beneficial for an athlete. But you really have to rein that in during pregnancy and postpartum. And honestly, it is very, very hard to contend with some days. And I had an ego at, times that athlete brain kind of creep in, and I'd be like, okay, I can put, a few more pounds on the bar. Because I had felt like, even though I wasn't deadlifting 315 anymore and I was deadlifting 185, like that was still okay. But at 36 weeks pregnant, deadlifting 185, was that really smart? Why? Like, that's the question is why, and honestly, there wasn't a good reason why. It was just, again, it was succumbing to that athlete brain. And, I wish I would have just reached out to a fellow coach, a coach, just for accountability to kind of help me rein that in. But it was, it's a learning. I learned a lot from that first pregnancy. And so carrying into labor and delivery, I had no pelvic floor symptoms. I made sure during pregnancy, like I didn't run and jump, and, I did all the things that you're supposed to do, protecting your core and pelvic floor, besides sometimes pushing the load a little bit. And so I went in really confident in labor and delivery, and I delivered at a military hospital. And right when I had, they said, okay, you're 10 centimeters, baby's coming, I had a shift change. And so a brand new birth team came in, and I had a couple requests, really simple. Don't ask me to purple push. Don't ask me to breath hold and push. Just because the implications of how much pressure and stress that is on the pelvic floor. There's various other ways that you can breathe through, that stage of labor. And don't put me on my back, unless I absolutely have to be put on my back. So there are just a couple things. And I was very disrespected by the midwife who delivered me. She made me feel like I didn't know what I was talking about, that I was kind of crazy, like this was her show, she was going to run the show. And she also, there was a point where where I had just gotten into this zone of like, I closed my eyes, and she actually physically flipped me onto my back. And I had an epidural. And by that point, I'm just like, there's so much going on, so much emotion, adrenaline. You're just kind of just like, whatever, I'm going to go with it.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't imagine. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Barrett was really healthy. I was healthy, and everything went fine. She aggressively stitched me up, didn't say congratulations, and left. And so after that experience, my husband and I got cleaned up, and we just kind of, before going into antepartum, we're like, wow. And the first thing I said to him, I was like, that was really disappointing. Like, that's not at all how I thought that would go. Just not having that support, and just kind of that feeling of like, just not respecting me too as a health professional is really disappointing. So anyways, I had told him also, I said, think I'm going to have a prolapse. And lo and behold,
wow, you knew that
yeah,
right after?
I had a feeling. And so about 3 weeks later, so I was about 3 weeks postpartum, and I got the typical heavy, achy, bulgy feeling vaginally. And I just knew, and I have a colleague, she's my pelvic floor physical therapist, who I texted, and I'm like, I have a prolapse. She's like, don't freak out. Like, you know, it's normal to feel those. You can have those heavy feelings since you had a vaginal delivery up to 6 to 8 weeks. Like, it's normal. Don't freak out now. We'll check you at like that, 6 to 8 week mark. And I was just like, yeah, but pretty sure I have it. And so,
yeah,
for the next 4 weeks, I just like stewed in that. And, I was anxious. Even having treated women with prolapse in the clinic and knowing and understanding it itself, when you go through it personally, it's a whole nother game, a whole nother side that you can't understand. You can't teach that to someone, what that feels like, what that means.
So will you explain for our listeners, what is a prolapse? What are the different types, and what kind you have?
Sure. So pelvic organ prolapse actually is extremely common. Honestly, I would even call it normal, because especially after labor and delivery, I mean, think about it, your baby, like, that is a huge, significant traumatic event. Things shift during pregnancy, things shift postpartum. And so our pelvic floor muscles are kind of like a trampoline, right? And they hold up our bladder, our uterus, our rectum. And sometimes, and this can even happen outside of pregnancy, in labor and delivery, but sometimes those,
just that it's not just limited to a vaginal birth.
Nope. It can happen. I mean, it can happen way later in life. It can happen to somebody who's never had babies and is younger. There's various different, but it's most common during labor and delivery. And those organs can descend into the vaginal canal, or pushing into the walls, the vaginal walls. And it goes by grades. So grade 1, it's descended just a little bit. 2, it's just how far down has it come into the canal, or into those walls? Has it pushed into the walls? And so the bladder, which is a cystocele, I have a grade 2 cystocele. I have a grade 2 uterine prolapse, where my uterus has descended. And then I also have a grade 2 rectocele, where, that posterior wall has kind of come down in the rectum. And so, going through those first 6 to 8 weeks, then finally having my OB say, yes, you do have a prolapse. That was really, really hard for me to accept, because I had known that the road back to fitness, where I placed my identity in, that's my job, that's what I enjoy. It should not have been where I've always placed my identity, but it has, and most people do. There's more important things, but that's where it had lied. I felt like that was taken away from me. And I felt like the road back to, being able to do the things I did prior to having my son were very dim, very slim, maybe a non-option ever again.
Right.
And Brianna had talked a lot, and Haley Shevener from Pop Uplift, she's in Brianna's course, and she has this amazing guide for women with prolapse that is extremely positive, very informative, very educational, just to give you all the tools and everything that you could possibly need to have to live your life with prolapse. And there, I found so much hope in that guide, plus being on the women's Facebook group with a whole bunch of other women who have prolapse, and to hear their stories and how so many women were able to get back to doing all the things that they love to do, and how this isn't, a doom and gloom diagnosis. It's very common. Again, like I want to call it normal because it's normal. It happens.
Yes.
I think there's so much fear surrounding prolapse because you think, oh my gosh, my organs are descending down. That's a big deal. That is mentally, that's a lot. And the symptoms, you know, can make you very fearful. But for me, I found the more education that I had, and I'm actually 90% done with her pop-up professionals course. So I'm
amazing.
Almost a pop-up professional.
Oh, I'm dying to take that. Oh, that's
it's
so cool.
really, really, really good. And so the more education that I had, the less fear I had, the less anxiety I had, the more I was able to trust in my body and that my body is adaptable, it's resilient. Not every day is going to be a good day.
Right.
You know, progression isn't necessarily going to be, you know, linear, but I am able to get back to you know, up until I got pregnant 17 weeks ago, was able to get back to everything I did prior to having my son. Now I had to do it with different strategies and things that I learned, different tools. It was a much, much slower progression working back up to those things. But it was doable. And I finally, at about 20 months postpartum, felt like I feel like me again. Like I really truly feel like myself. And that was such an amazing feeling to feel like, okay, now I don't need to place my fitness or my identity into fitness. However, it's still important to me. But I can have that balance, you know, to where like my body can still do the things I want it to do, but it's not everything if I can't, or, you know, if it has to be done in a different way.
Yeah. Oh man, there's just so much there. I think, like, really, thank you so much. You're just a wealth of experience and information. So talk to me a little bit about, especially with your like professional experience, the difference between the different symptoms that we might, at what point would you say you need to see a professional for this, or you need to look at a professional course like the pop-up lift or something like that? Because I hear a lot from women like, you know, I'm worried, I'm not totally sure, I think I might have this, or hey, I heard about this thing and I'm kind of feeling it, but I'm not totally sure. I think it might be kind of normal. And like you said, those first 6 to 8 weeks, there's a lot of things that are shifting, a lot of things that are very soft, some things that we can probably come to expect, but what is the difference? And if you are not someone who is, let's say, fortunate enough to go see a pelvic floor physical therapist after birth, no matter what, when would you recommend that they do that? What are the warning signs?
So with all my clients and patients, if I have them in pregnancy and stuff, especially like the ladies that I work with in the gym, what I ask them to ask their provider at their 6-week checkup is to check for diastasis and to check for prolapse. And then they can get, you know, if the provider says, hey, yeah, you have a grade 1 or grade 2, or yeah, you have a little bit of a prolapse, then for insurance purposes right there, that is pretty much depending on what insurance you have, that's your like ticket to pelvic floor physical therapy and it being covered because they've diagnosed it. You've asked for it, because a lot of times they won't assess that. They won't check you for that unless you ask for it.
Yeah.
And so I tell them ahead of time to ask to be checked. And then let's say that they weren't checked and I met them after the fact, and they're experiencing symptoms of vaginal where it just feels like heavy, like just like your pelvic floor in your vagina, it's just very heavy, it's achy. Maybe if you are, you know, going out it only like flares up maybe when you go on a walk, or you're like picking your child up and putting him in a car seat, but you just feel that heaviness, or like a tampon type is falling out, like that kind of feeling, or you feel or see a bulge. It just doesn't feel normal, like you're normal. prior to babies. And then, so that's a big one. And then some other symptoms, some women can have, I would say that's probably the biggest signal. There are some things that come along with it too. So maybe there's some urinary incontinence that comes with it. Those don't necessarily go hand in hand, but that would be something you would want to have addressed by a pelvic floor physical therapist. Maybe you're having difficulty with bowel movements. Maybe you're having some pelvic pain, hip pain, low back pain. And so if you're getting any of those types of symptoms, then I would say, okay, you need to ask your provider, depending on what state you're in. Sometimes there's, you can just go directly to a pelvic floor PT. You have to check with your insurance, but most oftentimes you have to go to your OB and ask for that pelvic floor referral. Now, if somebody didn't have access to pelvic floor physical therapy, then, and if they had gotten let's say their OB wouldn't refer them to pelvic floor physical therapy, because that does sometimes happen. And they have been told that they do have a small prolapse, but the OB doesn't think it's necessary for them to go to pelvic floor PT. So then they can look up the the uplifting guide program, which is phenomenal. Literally covers everything you need to know about prolapse. Helps you develop a large toolbox of strategies with movement, daily activities, talks about sex, pessary, surgery, everything. That's the most informative tool.
Even their social media is super informative. I think sometimes it's not only like whether the provider was able to refer them to the PT. Sometimes it's like, I've got 3 other kids at home and I'm by myself and I just don't know when I can make it happen that I'm going to get to go see the PT. So it's not like all or nothing. There are resources just like that, the pop-up lift, that you can reach out to. And so then maybe that we can go into a little bit, some of the strategies beyond, let's say, the professional support, guidance, manual adjustments, etc. Some strategies that you can try on your own. Literally any person anywhere could try implementing to help manage some of these symptoms.
And so, okay, so with prolapse or urinary incontinence, diastasis, there's these tools will actually work for all these different things. And the thing to know about it is they're just tools. So there's not one way of doing one thing. So one category is breathing, right? And so, you know, I took a Julie Wiebe course, which is super huge on piston breathing, which is one specific way of breathing. But I also did a mentorship under Anthony Lowe, and he's about like all the ways. And man, he like opened up my world big time, and just like breaking down the barriers, especially for physical therapy. We kind of like operate in this box of safety, right? And you know, yes, there are boundaries and limitations, but we tend to, within this box, kind of like stay in here and don't push out to the edge of those boundaries, and maybe don't try different things. And so one way of breathing, and I would encourage my clients and patients and listeners to try all the ways, there's not just one, but is diaphragmatic breathing. And so that is, you know, just breathing and inhaling into your rib cage, envisioning that rib cage is like an umbrella and you're opening up those ribs 360 degrees. That diaphragm talks with your pelvic floor, communicates, they work hand in hand. So on your inhale, that diaphragm is going to, you know, expand and open up like a balloon and descend a little bit downward. So the pelvic floor has to make way for that increase in pressure by relaxing and dropping down. And on the exhale, think of all the air is going out of the balloon, the pelvic floor responds and lifts back up. So a way of, in terms of that, if we know the pelvic floor responds really well to the exhale. So maybe when you're picking up your child, you exhale instead of breath holding, see what happens. You know, maybe you can try and inhale and see what happens. Your pelvic floor is very resilient. So there's no like, oh my gosh, if I hold my breath, my organs are going to fall out. That's not going to happen. And there are times, especially further along postpartum, that you are, if you do have a prolapse, and you follow progressive overload training, a breath hold can be very, very beneficial, very supportive, and your pelvic floor can respond really well to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some people breathe on their shoulders or like up into your chest. Maybe try breathing into your belly, try breathing into your nose, through your nose, maybe through your mouth. Try all the ways of breathing. But an exhale has been proven to be very supportive breath with movement. And again, it's not a hard, fast rule, but that's one strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Another strategy is positioning and alignment. That's another thing. Posture and alignment it varies. There's not one hard, fast rule. And so
Right.
there's, in the physical therapy world, it's been drilled in as neutral posture, neutral alignment, like neutral, optimal. Okay, well, that's not real life and that's not realistic. We're not going to be like in this one specific posture all day long. We just can't. You as a mom, like a new mom, are not going to be thinking about your posture all day long. Like,
and
that
your posture is going to change over the course of your pregnancy and birth. Like it just does.
Absolutely. And so if you find your tendency first of like, let's say I'm always just sitting back in my heels and I'm tucking my butt under, which is a pretty common postural position. Maybe I try shifting my weight towards the front of my feet. I'm unlocking my knees and kind of like untucking my butt and see what that feels like. Yeah. So you're kind of like testing and then reassessing. Yeah. You know, and maybe I'm only carrying my baby on my right hip all the time and I'm starting to get some hip pain. We'll maybe shift to the left, you know, maybe bring baby to the front. Like if you're constantly changing and moving things and kind of find what works best for you, because if we say neutral alignment, that's the most optimal position, but you actually feel worse symptom wise in neutral. Mm-hmm. Why are we having you be in neutral alignment? Let's find something that works best for you. Another thing is tension to task. So this is really big with people with prolapses. You're so fearful of like your organs falling out and, you know, lift something wrong and, oh my gosh, my grade is going to get worse, that your pelvic floor responds to that fear. And so you really grip, maybe you think you need to Kegel before you do a squat. And maybe you actually don't. And that's making your symptoms worse, where you really just need to relax. You need to breathe, let your pelvic floor respond to that movement. So I'm not going to gear up and create and grip and, you know, tighten everything to pick up my toddler versus a 300-pound barbell, right? Those are very two different, you know, demands that are, the tension is going to be very different that you're, you know, putting into that movement. And so that's another thing to pay attention to. Are you really over recruiting when you're doing something that can create symptoms? What did I say? Posture alignment, position, breathing, tension to task, movement in general. So let's just use a squat, for example. You know, starting out postpartum and working through squat movement, maybe standing upright, just having that against gravity position is symptomatic right now. And you can take it to like a half kneeling squat, or Haley has a good, just getting in the squat position, lying on your back with your feet up against the wall. Is something really good. And just breathing through that position. You can go then to, you know, sitting to a box, you know, then going to maybe a really light kettlebell, then eventually working up to a barbell. So there's, you know, so many different variables and things that you can play around with all sorts of different movements. So I never say like, okay, we're going to take the squat out entirely.
Totally.
We're going to try all the things. To make the squat accessible for you. So maybe that is even, accessible. Maybe that is even like foot position, how wide your squat stance is, you know, how deep you're going, how much load you're using, how much tension you're using with that squat. Again, maybe we do it. Maybe you feel really good on a leg press in the gym and just, you just are not feeling good under a barbell or something. So we can just try everything. I really like with my clients and patients is to really encourage them to get back to the things that they want to do and give them all the tools so that they can get there, and not say, You can never run again. You can never jump again. You shouldn't lift heavy again. Because why? Like, we can work up to those things. Your body is adaptable. You can get stronger. You are able to work up to doing those things again. It will take time, and you have to be patient, and we're going to have to, go, like I said, go through that progressive overload training, but we can get you there. I will get you there. It will be possible.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's, it's so, it's difficult. It can feel overwhelming when you're in it. It's like, I just want an answer. Just tell me the way to fix this. Tell me how to get from A to B so that I can just get back to feeling like myself. And the idea, or I often will say like, okay, well, let's try exhaling when you lower, or let's try doing this adjustment, or, for you, it might not, this type of breathing may not work, or right now, this load might not be accessible. So knowing that there's all of those variables and that there are a lot of different strategies can sometimes, I think, feel a little overwhelming and maybe kind of daunting. But there's also the potential to hopefully get inspired, where it's like, oh, I get to figure this stuff out. I get to actually listen to learning what to listen for, but I get to listen to my body and figure out this puzzle that's going to get me to feeling good and strong and confident. And something that you said earlier, I think is really important, where it's like, sometimes just having the information makes such a huge difference in our sense of confidence and understanding, where we can be navigating pregnancy or postpartum, feeling things going on in our body or with our movement, and not super sure of what they are or why they're happening. And that can really create this like heavy cloud around what we do, and the fear around what we do. But if we can get informed, if we can get in touch with someone who is an expert, then even though there might be work to do, or the journey might be kind of long to get to where we want to go, having some of that information is empowering and can really create a sense of confidence, I think, for a lot of us. I'd love to talk a little bit more about athlete brain. And you brought up athlete brain, and Brianna Battles coined this phrase or this term. She actually has a podcast that I share with like pretty much everyone that I know, because it's amazing. And athlete brain, the way that you mentioned it in your pregnancy, in terms of like, it can come up and almost lead to, it can lead to maybe pushing boundaries, or pushing yourself, or finding those limits. I think you find it a lot of times in people that want to like have some control over something, or people that are especially competitive or come from a more athletic background. But I don't think I'm much of those things. Like, I'm not a super athletic person, but the athlete brain definitely came up for me. And what I love about Brianna Battles and what she says in that podcast episode is about how you can leverage athlete brain. And use it to your advantage or to your benefit. Can you talk a little bit about that for yourself, and then for your clients or for the listeners?
So, and I think too, is like you said, athlete brain can creep up on anyone. It doesn't have to be just, somebody who's, like you said, has a very long, extensive competitive background, or, it's not a one personality. Like, it extends to everyone. And I found for me, it was more like the really, really subtle voice. It wasn't super loud. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, put on 5 more pounds, like on the bar, like it's okay. You're still not max lifting. And again, it goes back to the why. Like, why did I need to be deadlifting 185 at 30, I think it was 36, 37 weeks? You know, there was no point in that. There's nothing I had to prove. There was no, you know, gain from that. Also knowing how much pressure is already on my pelvic floor from baby and, you know, abdomen, I was just putting a lot more stress and load on that already stressed system, as Brianna likes to say. And so I think if you have to ask yourself, like she says, well, can I, or like, should I be doing this? If you question, well, I don't really know if I should be doing this movement, or maybe I have some symptoms or whatever, but I kind of think I can push through it. That's your answer. Like, that's your answer to know. And if you're really struggling with needing to know or wanting to know, or having a hard time identifying like what those boundaries are, hire a pregnancy postpartum athleticism coach, so that you can have somebody who's on the outside who know what that looks like, who knows what that feels like, to kind of guide you and rein you in. Because sometimes it's just really hard to identify. It can be very subtle, like I had said. It's very clear to me now. But in terms for this pregnancy and athlete brain, I have, because of experience of going through prolapse and everything, you know, I have really accepted why this chapter has to look different. And again, my personality is I can have all the education and the knowledge, but I still kind of want to push those boundaries and see what I can get away with, you know? Like, is it exempt? But I'm not exempt, clearly.
Right.
And so it's just really like it's really just shifting that mindset to where, you know, this is very temporary. Really, if you look in your entire lifetime of your fitness journey, this is such a very small time. You know, and you're setting yourself up for, you know, what you do in this pregnancy is really going to, it can, you know, it can determine what your long-term fitness looks like, you know, to an extent. You know, there will be cases and scenarios where you've done everything right and, you know, you still, you know, have some hurdles to jump over postpartum. But, you know, what you can control is your mindset and what you're doing during fitness. You are within control of that. That's not out of your control. And so really just kind of rein that ego per se in and saying, you know what, I'm not doing this for anybody else. I don't need to uphold some kind of image. You know, I'm really, really doing this with intention, with purpose, you know, because I have a very long-term goal of wanting to perform at my best and not have to jump through all these hurdles. And so that's something that I first talk to with all my clients is we talk about mindset. That's the number one thing that's got to change from, you know, that you really have to work through starting in your first trimester, because as time goes on, your fitness has to change. It has to evolve, has to adapt. And it will become harder, especially for an athlete who's used to being super competitive and has put their identity completely into fitness, to really go through those changes. And you just want to hold on to, like you said, control, hold on to that piece of what feels like yourself. Right. And just really knowing that what you do in the gym does not equal
who you are as a person.
Who you are as a person. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And I love that you started in the first trimester. And yeah, I would love to be able to plant the seed as early as possible that, you know, more so than how to modify your burpees.
Yes.
It's about how do we modify our mindset? You know,
Absolutely.
That's going to be the biggest game-changing tool to get through this season. minimizing some of the struggle that I think we can come up against, because some things, like you said, and I want to make it clear that like the prolapse isn't necessarily as a result of any one particular thing that you did. In fact, you could, like you said, you could do everything quote unquote right. And some things are out of your control. There are some variables about pregnancy, birth, postpartum that you cannot control. No matter how careful, how educated, how fit you are. So knowing that if at some point something becomes out of your control, like when you can start working out again or how you start working out again, what are you going to do when you come up against that challenge? And your fitness has to look different from what it's ever looked like before. How are you going to adapt, you know? And it's the mental part that I think is usually the hardest.
Yep. It is.
Okay, so let's say for the street parking community, you talked a lot about a lot of tools and resources that I'm familiar with through the pregnancy and postpartum athleticism community. Do you mind just going back over some of them? What are your favorite tools and resources on athleticism, fitness, pelvic health, etc., that you would want to share with the street parking community?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so there's so many. So on my Instagram, which is at ncgoss08, I do have highlights for postpartum, pregnancy, prolapse, diastasis, pelvic health. And I've saved in there really, really good information that I felt is like where you can go to get resources for those tools, but it will always be there. You know, it's not a 24-hour story goes away. And there's phenomenal people to follow. Carrie Pagliano, Brianna Battles.
Member now.
I know. Brianna Battles. There's Lisa Marie Ryan. There's, you know, we talked about Pop Uplift. Oh my gosh, there's so many more. Anthony Lowe, the physio detective. So I have tons and tons of resources saved in there. So if you want to find specific, because I could give a shout out to like 30 million people who do a really phenomenal job. That is probably the best place as far as, you know, everything core and pelvic floor and fitness. I really do like the Brianna Battles. She has a couple free resources about how to scale during pregnancy. You guys obviously do a wonderful job with your programming as well for moms. But prolapse specific, Pop Uplift, diastasis, there's several different resources. And there's just so many. That's
great. That's great. That's a good place. That's a good place to start for sure. Is there anything else that you want to add or share with the listeners or in particular the street parking members?
I just think, especially during pregnancy and postpartum, I would really recommend that you reach out to a coach, because this is a really have at least, or, you know, you can reach out to me and I can just, you know, check in on you periodically to see how you're doing, because just having that person to keep you accountable, because it really, really is hard. Everybody who's doing street parking, fitness is a priority, right? Health is a priority. So there is that. And two, there's kind of that competitive, it's fun to see the community, what everybody's doing, but needing to stay really dialed in and keeping these two chapters very intentional is sometimes difficult to do by yourself. And so I would totally recommend hiring a coach just to kind of help guide you, because also everybody's journey is going to be very individual. We can't give, like you had said, we can't just give burpee recommendations and modifications and things like that, because everybody's journey, their body, symptoms, everything is completely different. So having that one-on-one help is really key to getting you through this chapter. And giving yourself a whole lot of grace. Honestly, postpartum, I think women think, okay, I hit that 6-week mark and boom, I'm ready to go back into it. Your body takes a whole year to heal. So you need to think about that progression on a year timeline, not a 6-week timeline. And so it needs to be slow. It needs to be intentional. But in the grand scheme of things, that year goes by so incredibly fast. You'll be so surprised. And two, for the ladies who have prolapse, I just want to give you a huge virtual hug and tell you that I'm here with you. I know exactly how you feel. I support you. There is so much hope. There is so much help. This is not doom and gloom, even though I know it feels like that. And it's okay to grieve, and you need to grieve and go through that healing process. But definitely reach out to, Haley, get involved in that community, the Pop Up Lift community. You can message me anytime. Much love to you guys.
Oh, thank you. I know that is much needed. I'll be sure to share your Instagram handle and all of that information as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, for sharing your experience and your knowledge. I feel super lucky that I got to spend this time with you, and I'm excited for the street parking community to have more access to this type of information. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I am very honored. I'm so stoked to have been, messaged by you, and just, I feel like, oh my gosh. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that is it, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of the SP Mamas podcast. I'll see you next time.